Good morning, friends. Pastor Kelly here with you with the Friday edition of Grace Thoughts. Before we went on our few-week break, we had introduced the subject of trauma, which means wound, and we led into what we started Wednesday is post-traumatic stress syndrome, which is directly connected to trauma. Post-traumatic stress is the effect of the wound that trauma causes. I think what happens with us sometimes is we don't always define it, as I didn't always define it. We don't always believe it, but it's probably a lot more widespread than we would ever think that it is. We think of post-traumatic stress and we attach it to a soldier because our soldiers sometimes, they live in these highly pressurized situations for a long, long time. Then their eyes see things that they should never see, and they behold things they should never behold. It was never what God intended them to do, and it changes the chemistry of their brain. They would tell you that. Now, it manifests different ways, and there's different levels of it, but that's what trauma does. It changes the chemistry of your brain. It physically changes the chemicals of your brain and the structure of your brain. As it was told to me by Norman Wright, my brain was bruised or tattooed, and it changed. Things changed. So how does this manifest itself? Well, first of all, it's going to be different for everybody. Some's going to be mild, some is going to be very, very severe, and some of it will change and morph over time. You lose mental capacity. It's one of the things you do, especially early on. I'm just speaking from experience. You lose the ability to focus and to concentrate. You become sometimes reactionary on one big button. Things that never bothered you now. I had one person who went through a traumatic experience, said all of a sudden they developed a fear of flying. They could have thought about being in a airplane tube and flying 33,000 square feet, which is a little horrifying even without post-traumatic stress, and it's something they had overcome. Somebody else told me they couldn't drive over bridges anymore. Every time they'd hit a bridge, and they'd been driving their whole life, they're about my age, and they would get just gripped with anxiety and fear. Post-traumatic stress, that's what caused it. In my case, I would get very dizzy. I would have it without focusing, I would call it a fog. I would get dizzy to a point where I couldn't even drive. Now, that doesn't happen to me anymore. That passed through after the last couple of years. But these are some of the ways that it affects different people. My wife has a very severe effect, and she has a time when in certain times she'll just pass out. And she's passed out a couple times and cracked her head a few times. Post-traumatic stress. And that's why we're talking about it. Is a whole grocery list of tortures that enter our life. It could be going to the grocery store for somebody that you love, or their birthday that comes by, or the date of the event that when you lost them, that triggers all these physical manifestations and emotional reactions. So it's the real deal, and we're going to talk about how you help overcome some of these things. I'm not going to just leave you with the definition, but it's really good to understand it before we can combat it, and then we can fight it with truth. So from now on, we're going to look back a little bit, but we're going to look ahead. How do we move on from the trauma in our life? And that's going to be starting Monday. Bless you all. Have a great weekend.